was a gloomy afternoon. The sunset had not completely faded yet when a canine dog named Shadow suddenly stopped in front of an old school bus, sitting silently at the far end of the parking lot. There was no strange noise, no suspicious sign, but he growled, then unexpectedly lunged forward, clawing furiously at the back door of the bus like he had lost his mind. No one understood what was going on. Not until the officer walking with him opened the bus door and saw a school backpack lying abandoned under one of the seats next to markings that looked like someone had been trapped inside for days. From that very moment, a terrifying trail of truth began to unfold piece by piece through the eyes and instincts of that very dog. The wind was light, but the leaves in the schoolyard did not move. The empty courtyard where kids should have been running and laughing after their last class of the day suddenly felt unnervingly wrong. No voices, no footsteps, not even the sound of birds. Just a chilling silence, as if this place had swallowed something and no one had noticed yet. The sky was a dull gray like wrinkled carbon paper, and in that thick, motionless air, the canine dog named Shadow stood frozen near the back fence of the school, staring through the rusted chain-link wire. No growling, no howling. Just standing there, ears perked up, body stiff like a statue, eyes locked on a patch of messy grass where the ground looked like it had been lightly and unevenly disturbed, far from any walkway. The young police officer who was patrolling with him, Lieutenant Eli Thompson, stopped in his tracks when he saw the dog's reaction. "Shadow," he called, softly reaching out to gently touch the leash. The dog did not respond, did not even flinch. But a second later, he slowly walked toward that corner of the fence, lowering his head very close to the ground, as if listening to a sound no human could hear. Then, suddenly, he started clawing at the dirt, not too hard, but just enough to reveal a small object hidden under the wild grass, a pink button, the kind usually sewn onto an elementary school uniform jacket. Eli's hand went cold instantly. The next day, the school sent out an internal notice. A third-grade student named Emily Simmons had not returned home after class. She had left her classroom at 3:15 in the afternoon and was confirmed to have boarded the bus as usual, according to the teacher supervising the schoolyard. No one saw her after that. The bus driver, Mr. Hank Williams, insisted I dropped off all the kids. I counted carefully. But when they checked the footage from the bus's onboard camera, the memory was completely wiped from 3:15 to 4:20 due to what they claimed was a storage card error. A strange coincidence. The bus manager said it was just a technical glitch that happens from time to time. The police asked to review the school's gate camera, but that night the equipment had temporarily shut down due to an unexpected power outage. Eli said nothing. He simply reopened the photo of the tiny pink button from the day before, then quietly pulled up the elementary school student roster. Emily, born in 2015, brown hair, big eyes, loved dogs and drawing. Described as very quiet but always well-behaved, never caused any trouble. A quiet little girl now gone in a silence even more terrifying than her presence. That afternoon, Eli returned to the backyard area where Shadow had found the button. The ground still showed digging marks, though someone had clearly tried to cover them up. The grass had been crushed, but the strangest part was a faint tire track running diagonally across the yard, not aligned with the usual route taken by school buses. Eli asked the technical team to recheck the bus schedule. An old bus vehicle number 19B, which had been listed under maintenance for the past 2 months, had suddenly shown a GPS signal ping at exactly 3:32 in the afternoon, the same day Emily went missing. That bus was not supposed to be in use, at least not officially. In a private conversation, Eli approached Emily's homeroom teacher. Her name was Anna, and she was known for being dedicated. But when Eli asked about the day the incident happened, her answer felt off. I I remember Emily left class like usual. Someone came to pick her up, I think. Who? A man. One time I asked and she said it was her uncle. Was that confirmed by her parents? The teacher stayed silent. Eli looked her straight in the eyes. She avoided his gaze. We cannot verify everyone. There are just too many students and different family members come to pick them up all the time. At that moment, Shadow was sitting by the window in the office. Suddenly, he let out a low growl so quiet it seemed to come from his chest, not his throat. His ears stood straight and his eyes locked onto the teacher. Anna began to tremble. A second later, she burst into tears. I cannot keep lying anymore. Eli silently recorded her statement. Anna admitted that a man had shown up several times near the schoolyard. He usually stood hidden behind the fence far from the pickup area. No one in the administration questioned him because he wore what looked like a district employee's uniform, a yellow jacket with an old county logo. One time she saw Emily walk out through the back fence where there were no cameras and step onto a faded yellow school bus parked behind the gym. She thought it was a private transport service hired by the family. I did not know. That was the last time. The following day, Eli and Shadow went back to inspect the bus yard. Bus 19B, just as the report said, was no longer in the lot. No one knew who had taken it. No one knew who had driven it. No checkout form was filed. Shadow circled the yard, then suddenly stopped at a section of side fencing. He scratched it 3 times lightly, then sat down. Eli walked over. A small piece of fabric was caught on the barbed wire, a pale pink plaid strip just like the edge of Emily's school shirt. Eli said nothing. He simply tightened his grip on the leash as Shadow looked up at him, eyes steady as if urging him to understand something. Something still beyond human sight. Shadow stayed there unmoving in front of the fence, as if he too was listening for something on the other side, something only he could hear. A breeze rose, but it did not bring relief. It carried a damp, musty scent like rusted metal and trampled weeds. Eli crouched to inspect the spot Shadow had scratched, and for the first time he saw a small dried blood stain on the tip of the wire mixed with a single pale pink thread. No one had reported any accident there. No student had been recorded as injured in that area in the past month. Eli stood up, scanning the surroundings. No witnesses, no cameras, no eyes watching. Only him and Shadow. That night, Eli sat alone in his office under the dim glow of a yellow desk lamp. On his desk were printed logs of every school bus route from the past 6 months. But the line he could not look away from read Bus 19B, route canceled as of April 12th. Reason: irreparable mechanical failure. Emily disappeared on May 14th. He re-entered each bus's code into the location tracking system, and just as his instincts told him, Bus 19B had pinged a GPS signal during the time Emily vanished at a location 2 miles south of the school, an abandoned industrial zone. No reports, no explanation, no documentation of the bus being brought back into use. Eli saved the coordinates on his phone. When he looked up, Shadow was already sitting at the office door, silent, tail still. His eyes locked with Eli's, deep and direct, like the gaze of someone who had just uncovered a truth too heavy to say aloud. The next morning, Eli and Shadow arrived at the old industrial zone where Bus 19B had last been tracked. The air there felt frozen in time. Rusty gates, warehouse buildings locked with makeshift chains. But curiously, the grass along the roadside was pressed down in a sweeping arc, a fresh tire mark, still bare of regrowth. Shadow lowered his head, letting out a faint, hiss-like sound. But as Eli approached one of the smaller warehouses, Shadow suddenly stopped in place. No bark, no growl. Just one step backward. His ears flattened not in submission, but as if he had just recognized a scent. Something familiar, but so disturbing he dared not go any closer. Eli stared at him. For the first time on this journey, he saw Shadow tremble. The dog did not turn away, but his whole body tensed, breathing quickened, as if the memory of this place had touched a part of him that hurt something even loyalty could not easily overcome. Eli did not push him. He crouched down softly, saying, "It is all right. We go together." Only then did Shadow manage to take a step forward, slow, cautious steps. No growling now, just quiet movement like he was walking back into a memory with a wound that had never healed. That morning, a light fog had settled over the town. Tiny droplets clung to the windows, making the view behind them fade into a blur. Eli parked in front of the district's technical warehouse, where they kept old bus records and route logs from past school years. Shadow stayed close at his side, no leash needed. Since the day they found the dried blood at the school fence, something unspoken had formed between the two, one who spoke, one who did not. No commands, no calls, just eye contact. The archive was at the end of a dark hallway. The door was unlocked, but its hinges creaked and the air inside smelled of damp paper and old engine oil. Eli pushed the metal door open and the overhead light flickered like a dying lantern. On the shelves were thick files, tied with rope labeled by month and bus number. He skimmed through 12A, 14F, 17C, and stopped at 19B. The file was thinner than the others. Eli placed it on the table and turned the pages. Everything seemed standard routine: maintenance, tire replacements, oil changes, and the engine shutdown dated April 12th. But the odd part was at the end, the route log for May 14th was torn. The edge was fresh, not yet discolored. He frowned. A missing report in a storage room no one cared about. Without a word, he sealed the folder in an evidence bag. From the corner of the room, Shadow watched him. But his eyes were fixed not on Eli, but on a patch of the wall to the right where a faint boot print remained, like someone had stood there for a long time, trying not to leave a trace. That same afternoon, Eli visited the central maintenance station where bus 19B had once been kept. The night shift supervisor, Jeff Thin, quiet with eyes that rarely looked up, flipped through his notebook and clicked his tongue when Eli asked, "Bus 19B. I remember it was towed to the back lot. But the maintenance report says it has been out of service since last month." That is true. But last week, someone from higher up called, told us to open the lot for a technician to check the engine. I did not ask questions. Who signed the release? There was no paperwork. They said it would be a quick check. Eli stared at him. "Did you see who they were with?" Jeff shook his head, then paused, remembering something. There was a guy dressed like a technician. But what, my dog? He went nuts when that man came in. Normally, he is calm. But that day, he did not bark like usual. He growled real low, like your dog is doing now. Eli looked down. Shadow standing beside him was growling softly, eyes not on Jeff, but fixed on the back window of the technical office. Eli stepped closer. The door was locked, but when he leaned in to look inside, what he saw made his blood run cold. A silvery purple lunch bag, the exact kind used by school kids, with a unicorn printed on the front. Outside, Shadow howled for the first time since the case began. After securing a warrant to search the maintenance facility, Eli and the forensics team went through the room. The unicorn lunch bag was clearly meant for a child. No food remained inside, but the milk carton wrapper still had a faded name written in marker, Emily S. On the workbench, they found a printed screenshot from a security camera dated May 14th, but strangely, it was not in the digital database. The footage showed a school bus pulling into the yard at around 3:27 in the afternoon, then leaving 9 minutes later. No one got off. No one inspected it. The license plate was blurry, but the shape of the bus, it was unmistakably number 19B. Eli held the printout eyes locked on the timestamp. 3:27 in the afternoon. Emily disappeared at 3:15. The bus left at 3:36. That was enough time to pick her up, lock her in, and vanish. That night, in a small room where Eli was temporarily staying at the police station, a light rain fell. He sat at the desk staring at the printout over and over again. Shadow lay at his feet, head resting on his front paws, but his eyes wide open. Near midnight, Eli's phone vibrated. A message from a hidden number. "Stop looking for the bus. It does not run on roads. It runs in the system." Eli froze. He turned to Shadow. The dog was still staring at him, eyes silently saying, "Now you understand." Eli sat up straight. The phrase, "It does not run on roads. It runs in the system," echoed in his mind like a twisted mantra. What system? The school system, transportation? Or something even bigger, an invisible network that stretched beyond both? He reopened the district's GPS tracking logs for all buses over the past 30 days. The data showed that bus 19B had appeared only once in that entire month on the day Emily went missing. No other activity, no engine started, no refueling, but there was something strange every day. At exactly 3:30 in the afternoon, the time school let out a GPS signal disruption would appear near the old maintenance yard, as if some phantom bus had passed through just enough to cause interference, but not enough to be officially recorded. Eli marked every one of those timestamps. The pattern was chilling each time the disruption occurred. There was a report of a student being absent without explanation, only to return to class days later as if nothing had ever happened. Something was happening, regularly, with planning, and it was wrapped in the perfect disguise of a school day. The next morning, Eli returned to Emily's school. He requested a private meeting with the principal, Mr. Garner, a man who had worked there for over 20 years. The principal's office was unusually neat, almost sterile. On the desk sat a bronze statue of Lady Justice, but it was turned slightly to the right, not facing forward. Garner greeted him with a stiff smile. "Officer Thompson, I heard you are investigating the disappearance, the early departure of young Miss Simmons." It was not a departure. It was a disappearance. The room fell silent. Eli did not mince words. "Does the school use QR codes to track students getting on buses?" "Yes. We scan each student as they board to monitor the route and ensure safety." "Then why does the record show that Emily got on the bus, but there is no QR code scanned for her?" Garner was quiet for a few seconds. Then he spoke softly, almost like a confession. "The scanning system has had issues since last month. Some days it fails. Some students ride the bus without their scan being recorded." Eli stared at him. "Or someone is deliberately not scanning them." Principal Garner swallowed hard. His eyes sank like he was staring into the very abyss he had been trying to avoid. Right then, Shadow, who had been lying quietly under the table, let out a deep, sharp growl. It was not just a warning growl, it was fierce. Everyone in the room instinctively stepped back. Eli looked down. Shadow's eyes were locked on the bronze statue of Lady Justice, unblinking. Eli stepped forward and gently turned the statue back to its proper orientation. Click. A soft sound, and under the statue's wooden base, a tiny piece of paper had been wedged between the layers. He pulled it out. It was a list of students marked as unauthorized absences between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, spread across the last 3 months. All were under the 5th grade. No follow-ups, no parental reports, and every single one of them had returned to class days later as if they had never been gone. That night, Eli returned to the abandoned warehouse where the unicorn bag had been found. He stood still in the darkness, his watch's flashlight barely illuminating the space around him. Shadow led the way, no light needed. This time he brought Eli to a metal floor hatch. hidden under moldy burlap sacks and broken tire rims. Shadow stopped letting out a soft, urgent whine. Eli moved the sacks. The hatch creaked open. Beneath it was a narrow tunnel just wide enough for a person to crawl through. He aimed his light down. It was damp inside, but there were fresh signs of movement, drag marks, small footprints, and the lingering chemical stench of chlorine bleach and something sharper, the scent of covered-up panic. Eli did not go in. He pulled out his phone, saved the coordinates, and called dispatch. "I need a forensics team and a narrow space search unit. Immediately." Shadow remained by the hatch, still, ears drooped. No howling, no growling, just his eyes, staring into the black hole below, as if calling out to a soul that had not yet escaped. Eli exhaled softly, as if afraid even his breath would disturb whatever still slept beneath the earth. He crouched, looked at Shadow for a long moment, and gently stroked his head once. "We will come back," he whispered, not to the dog, but to someone unseen, someone listening through the mist in the air. 2 days later, the forensics report came in. Inside the tunnel, they found strands of human hair confirmed to be from a child, and one dried blood sample which matched the DNA of Emily Simmons. But there was no body, no sign of long-term occupation, only traces of what investigators called a temporary holding site, a place where victims were kept for a few hours, maybe a single night, and then vanished. One side passage had been crudely sealed with bricks and loose concrete. It showed signs of use, but had been hastily blocked. It could lead somewhere, or it could be a dead end. No one knew. Eli returned one last time to the tunnel hatch. This time, Shadow neither howled nor whined. He simply lay down, head resting on his front paws, eyes still fixed on the darkness, as if he understood some children would never walk out of there again. And in that moment, Eli knew this was no longer a missing person investigation. It was the dismantling of a hidden system built on adult silence, fueled by digital convenience, and operated by those cold enough to know that if you hide something long enough, people will eventually forget. Eli printed the photo and went to the personnel archives at the district's school coordination center. By comparing images, he confirmed the identity of the man in the footage, Troy McKinney, a former part-time security guard at Westbury Elementary, the very school Emily attended. But something strange stood out in the personnel file. Troy was listed as having resigned last year with no clear reason. There was only a brief note: withdrew application, did not return. No updated address, no contact number. No one in the administration could recall exactly when he left. It was as if his presence had always been a shadow, and when he disappeared, no one bothered to remember his footsteps. Eli did not believe in coincidences. He decided to follow the trail backward. By the end of that day, after digging through pension records and checking county medical data, Eli found Troy's last known address, an old workers' housing unit on the border between the city and a long-abandoned industrial zone. He went alone, no backup team. But Shadow rode in the back seat, silent as a guardian spirit. House number 17 on Maple Street looked like it had been forgotten by time. The tin roof was rusted. Water stains marked the cracked walls. The front steps were rotting, leaning dangerously to one side. But behind the drawn curtains, a dim light glowed. Eli knocked. Once, no answer. A second time, he heard the soft swish of a curtain from inside. The third knock, the door creaked open just a crack. Behind it stood an older man, weary eyes, voice rough and brittle. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said right away, like an old reflex. Eli held up the photo. "You were seen on the grounds of Westbury Elementary 3 days ago. You know what's happening to those kids, especially Emily Simmons." Troy said nothing, but his shoulders sagged. He looked at Shadow, the dog, standing beside Eli, not barking, not stepping forward, just staring as if he too was waiting for an answer. "Come in," Troy whispered. "But I can't promise you'll like what you're about to hear." Inside the house, the light from an old desk lamp cast a dim yellow hue, throwing jagged shadows on the walls like reaching hands groping through silence. Troy poured Eli a glass of water, but did not drink himself. He sank into a worn-out armchair, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast, as if trying to erase images only he could see. "I used to man the back gate. That was the special pickup zone," he began. "Every day, a few kids would be signed out by their parents to be picked up there. Easier access, no crowd at the main gate. I remember Emily," he added after a long pause. "Sweet kid. Tiny. Always carried a stuffed bear. But one time I saw her get on a bus with no license plate. It was a school bus, but the paint was faded and the plate had black decals covering it. I asked the driver and he said he was a replacement. You report that to the school." Troy shook his head. "I was going to, but then I got called into the principal's office. They told me I was disrupting pickup procedures. Said if I kept asking questions, they'd suspend my contract. And you know," he gave a bitter smile, "my contract was never permanent to begin with. So you chose to stay silent. At first I thought I was just being paranoid. But then I started seeing strange things." Troy stood up, opened a small cabinet, and pulled out an old folder tied with a cloth strap. He opened it. Inside was a stack of plastic student name tags, the kind used for scanning onto the bus. "These are tags I found in the backyard, lost in the grass. No child ever came back for them. And the weirdest part is some of these names do not even exist in the school's system anymore." I asked my cousin, who works in the tech department, to look into it. The names, the ID numbers, everything was erased from the database. Eli picked up a few of the tags. One still had a faint line, Adrian T., 2nd grade. Another, Mia R., 4th grade. Names that had never appeared in any missing persons reports. No one ever asked, no one ever searched, and all of them vanished under the quiet cover of a system that logged boarded bus safely. One afternoon, Troy whispered, "I stayed late for my shift. It was raining, and I heard knocking. Not loud, not urgent. Just a soft tapping from inside one of the buses parked at the far end of the lot. You sure it wasn't your imagination? I used to think so. But Shadow doesn't imagine things, does he?" He glanced at the dog lying beside Eli. Shadow lifted his head slightly, eyes wide open. I walked over. But the door was locked. I knocked on the window. No response. But I saw a faint handprint on the fogged glass from the inside. And the next morning, the bus was gone. When Eli left Troy's house, night had already fallen. Thin rain glistened in the glow of the streetlights, blurring the world like a watercolor painting melting in silence. He sat in his car for a long while. Shadow rested his head on the center console, eyes fixed forward like he could still hear the faint knocking that Troy spoke of. Eli knew what he had to do next, not to find more evidence, but to seek truth in the eyes that kept turning away. 3 days later, Eli returned to Westbury Elementary, but this time he did not go through the front gate. He and Shadow circled around to the gym yard, the place Troy mentioned as the special pickup zone. The grass had been trimmed, the surface spotless, not a single trace, too spotless. Eli bent down, inspecting the paving stones. Shadow walked slowly, nose to the ground. No whining, no barking. But near the chain-link fence that bordered the empty lot behind, he stopped, lifted his head, and looked up at the corner-mounted camera on the light pole. Eli followed his gaze. That camera listed in the records as broken since the beginning of the school year. But now its signal light was blinking, recording, watching. But who was keeping those recordings? Eli called the tech department. The response was the same as always. The auxiliary yard camera is still down. Recording is unstable. No footage available. A blatant lie. Eli knew that when a lie is repeated often enough, the system starts treating it as protocol. He walked into the administrative office. Principal Garner was not present. Instead, he was met by the assistant principal, Mrs. Dolores Green, an older woman with eyes that always looked like they were about to cry. "You knew Emily, right?" Eli asked directly. "Yes." Of course she hesitated. "A sweet little girl. Do you know other students who were absent without excuse, then came back without explanation?" Mrs. Green said nothing, but her eyes dropped. Her hands clutched the edge of her blazer tightly. Eli placed the file Troy had given him on the desk. "These are QR code tags deleted from the system. Please look through the names, see if any seem familiar." Her hands trembled when she saw the name Sasha L. A tear slid down her cheek. That girl was missing for 3 days. Then she came back. No one said a word, but she was no longer the same. "What do you mean?" She stopped smiling, stopped playing with friends, just sat alone drawing pictures of cages and locked doors. I once asked her mother. She said she doesn't remember anything. But she stopped, took a deep breath. "I think someone told you not to talk about that, didn't they?" Eli asked gently. Mrs. Green looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Someone from the school district. They told me it was a post-COVID psychological issue. They said I should not spread mass delusion. They gave me a pre-signed document requiring absolute confidentiality regarding any cases of temporary child disconnection." Eli sat still. Those words wrapped in clinical phrasing, cold and distant, reduced a child's pain to a statistical term. That night, when Eli returned to the police station, he found a middle-aged woman waiting on the front steps. "I'm Adrian T's mother," she said, handing him an old name tag, the same kind Troy had kept. "My son went missing for 2 days. The police wouldn't open a case. The school told me I must have misunderstood because he was marked present. What happened after he came back? But..." He stopped sleeping, stopped speaking. He just clutched a piece of paper over and over, drawing the same yellow bus with no back door, and a shadowy figure standing in the last seat. No face, no mouth, just a pair of pitch-black eyes. Eli clenched his fist. Shadow sat beside him, ears twitching slightly. "Do you think the woman asked my son was taken on the same bus as Emily?" Eli looked at her. No nod, no shake of the head. He only said, "We are trying to find the truth, but I need your help." The woman bowed her head. "I do not want to stay silent anymore." The very next morning, Eli and a forensic investigator returned to the bus maintenance facility. They requested access to all maintenance logs for Bus 19B and any other buses that had left the yard between 2:30 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon over the past 3 months. A digital report was provided, but when compared with the physical notebook Troy had secretly copied, there was a discrepancy. Troy's notebook included a note, Bus 22D, ordered for special inspection, March 18th, April 25th, May 12th. The digital file blank. No record of any bus labeled 22D being in service on those dates. But recovered footage from the garage sent anonymously by an underground IT technician showed clearly Bus 22D had left the lot each time at the exact moments students from Shadow's marked list had gone missing. Eli returned to the school one final time. He stopped in the gym yard. Shadow walked straight to a nearby tree, scratched the ground, whined, growled softly. Eli crouched down, and this time he saw a small plastic toy, half a puzzle piece, shaped like a bunny still covered in dried mud. Not big, not expensive, just a piece of a memory buried. A piece of evidence no one would ever log, but enough to summon back the shadow of a child, forgotten by the very place once called a safe school. The warehouse's steel door was sealed shut, covered in rust. But oddly, the padlock hanging on the handle had no dust, no cobwebs, no signs of long abandonment. Eli reached out red paint rubbed off lightly onto his fingers. The smell of fresh paint. Someone had tried to make this place look like a forgotten junkyard, but in truth it was still being accessed frequently. Shadow clawed at the base of the door, once, twice, then let out a growl not loud but sharp and firm like a needle slicing through the throat of silence. Eli did not wait. He grabbed a crowbar, nudged the lock gently, then pulled with his hands. The door snapped open, creaking like broken bones. Inside was pitch dark. Damp, moldy air mixed with something oddly sweet, the scent of chemicals. The atmosphere in here, it was not that no one had entered. It was that someone had deliberately masked the human scent with something else. Shadow stepped in first. His paws moved across a thick layer of dust, but not evenly thick. Some areas had been wiped clean as if small wheels had rolled through, or adult footprints had been covered with burlap. Eli shone his flashlight. In the trembling beam, he saw a stack of dismantled school chairs piled in the corner. A few still had chewing gum stuck underneath, the kind of thing only elementary school kids did. On the wall, faint chalk lines remained, sloppily written words. Shh! Be quiet. No one knew who wrote it, or who it was written for. Eli turned toward Shadow. That was when the dog began to whimper. Not a bark, not a growl. Just shallow, trembling breaths like something from behind was staring back at them. Eli aimed his light in the direction of Shadow's gaze and found a second door, smaller, blocked by an old rug. Shadow scratched at the rug, decisively. Eli pulled it aside. The door was not locked, just barely shut. Behind it was a small room, no windows, no furniture, just four walls and a pink backpack with a broken strap lying dead center. He stepped inside. His flashlight scanned the space. On the wall there was a single dust print of a small hand. Round, clear, so tiny it could only belong to a child between 6 and 8 years old. And on the floor was a torn piece of crayon art ripped at one corner. Eli bent down. The drawing showed a brown dog standing in front of a school bus. Behind the dog was a girl reaching out her hand. In the lower corner, in shaky, childlike handwriting, were the words, "Shadow, you came back." Eli stood frozen for a long time, not from fear, but because what hit him in the chest at that moment was not doubt, but a vague, burning certainty a child had waited to be saved here. Maybe it was Emily, maybe someone else, but the name Shadow could not be a coincidence. He turned to look at the dog sitting silently at the doorway. Shadow did not step inside. He just lowered his head, resting his snout on his front paws. His posture matched the drawing perfectly. Eli walked over to the backpack, unzipped it. Inside was a small stuffed bear, one ear torn, and a slip of paper with handwritten times, 3:32, 3:40, no light, no sound. A schedule, a rule, or a memory. He folded the paper, placed it in an evidence bag, and stood up. But as he turned to leave, his flashlight swept across the left wall, and for a few seconds he froze. There it was. A dog's claw mark, not drawn, but scratched deep into the raw concrete wall. 4 clean, narrow gouges about 24 inches from the ground, the exact height of Shadow's stance. Eli turned back. "You have been here before, haven't you?" Shadow did not respond, but his eyes remained locked on the scratch marks, and Eli knew. He knew better than anyone. That night, back in his private office, he laid out everything from the case across the table, photos, witness statements, physical evidence, timelines, bus routes. It all looked scattered, fragmented through the lens of a traditional investigation. But through the intuition of someone who no longer believed in coincidence, Everything began to align like drifting pieces of wood slowly pulled together by an invisible current toward one central point, the second bus. Not bus 19B, not 22D, but a vehicle outside the system, no license plate, no schedule, no paperwork. A ghost bus created to slip through the blind spots of infrastructure designed to carry children away from the edges of society's vision. And somehow Shadow had known about it, had been on it, had smelled it. Eli reopened Shadow's K9 file. He flipped to the unusual behavioral incident report. 10 months ago, during a major sweep tied to a child trafficking network in a neighboring state, Shadow had disappeared for 48 hours. The entire rapid response unit went into chaos. A high-level K9 vanishing mid-operation should have triggered a Level 1 emergency. Eli had requested an independent inquiry asked to trace Shadow's GPS and scent path. But the higher-ups dismissed it. The official report read, Shadow was located at an abandoned bus yard. No injuries. Possibly separated during panic triggered by a loud explosion. Eli never believed that, but every inquiry he made was handled internally. He was reassigned out of the tracking unit within 24 hours. Now he understood. It had never been an accident. It was a thread quietly buried before it could be pulled. The next morning, Eli quietly took Shadow back to the western bus yard, the place where he had returned after that 48-hour disappearance. No signs, no cameras, just a cracked concrete lot moss crawling between every seam weeds, growing where asphalt had given up. Eli gave no command, no leash. Shadow opened the car door himself, stepped out, walked slowly between the rusted frames of dead buses like retracing a memory, then suddenly stopped in front of the fourth bus from the left. The dog growled low, scratched the door 3 times. Eli stepped forward. The lock was rusted but not latched. A light push opened it, and a wave of musty, moldy cold hit them like an invisible slap. No one inside, but the floor still bore signs eerily similar to the ones from the room where Emily had once been held. Claw marks on the wood, old duct tape, its adhesive still sticking to the seat frames. A bent metal bar at the back, grooves from rope or plastic cuffs. On the last seat, pinned with a tiny sewing needle, was a note, "Next time, watch the dog." Eli clenched the note so tightly the needle cut into his skin. Blood beaded up. He did not notice. The handwriting was neat, slanted, not rushed. It belonged to someone trained, someone who made notes for a living, someone familiar with the process. Not a child, not a random threat. It was a warning from the other side, from someone who knew exactly who Shadow was and that they had almost been exposed. Eli crouched, inspecting the claw marks on the seat frame. Dog claws, dried, likely weeks old. He did not need confirmation, just one look at Shadow told him the dog remembered. Not as images, but as scent, a kind of memory that never fades. Shadow did not howl, but his eyes had changed from alert to warning. On the drive back, Eli got a call from the forensic team. DNA on the pink backpack matched Emily. No doubt she had been there. Another hair sample taken from the last seat of the newly found bus matched another student from the disappeared, then returned list. No medical records, no injury reports, just pre-written statements about students returning to class after minor illness. Each document spotless, as if printed from a template. Every parent's signature disturbingly identical, as if forged or coerced. That night, when Eli opened the bus system database again, he noticed a new entry bus, 88X, had just been added to the routing list. No announcements, no purchase records, only one note: backup vehicle for sudden route changes. Eli traced the parking location. Bus 88X was currently parked in a private lot on the outskirts outside district jurisdiction. Without hesitation, he drove through the night with Shadow. By the time they arrived, it was nearly morning. The lot was silent. Gate locked, no security. Eli climbed the fence. Shadow followed close behind. Inside was a graveyard of rusted buses long out of service. But 88X was different. New, clean, still warm. Eli placed his hand on the hood. The engine had shut off less than an hour ago. Shadow let out a hiss, the first in days, then bolted to the rear door, clawing at it furiously. Not once, but dozens of times until blood began to seep from his paws. Eli opened the door. Inside was empty. No people, no belongings, except for a small blanket folded neatly and still warm. Someone had just left, had just realized they were being followed. Eli looked to the last row of seats. No teddy bear, no drawing. Just a torn strip of fabric with a purple unicorn. Shadow collapsed, panting eyes, still fixed on the dark rear of the bus. Eli sat beside him. For the first time in this investigation, he felt helpless in a way that no past failure had ever made him feel. Not because they failed to find the perpetrator, but because everything they had found was enough to feel, but not enough to convict. No eyewitnesses, no footage, no testimony. Only a dog trying to say what the entire system refused to hear. Eli gently stroked Shadow's head. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel something he had buried his entire career, a compassion that existed beyond protocol, not just for the victims, but for his four-legged partner, the only one who needed no words to understand and no evidence to know right from wrong. That afternoon, when Eli submitted his preliminary report to the higher-ups, he laid out every detail and sequence evidence testimony, recorded statements from witnesses like Troy and Mrs. Green. But the response he received was cold insufficient to open a criminal case. Need names, clear photographs, direct witness descriptions. Child recollections and canine reactions are not admissible as legal evidence. Not admissible. Eli read the line over and over, like an indictment in reverse. Not admissible yet enough to make someone on the other side afraid. Because if they were not afraid, they never would have written, "Watch the dog." That night, Eli did not sleep. He stayed at the patrol station where Shadow was assigned for rest. The room was quiet. Dim, yellow light. The smell of old wood and disinfectant. Shadow lay on his mat, but not curled like usual. He stretched out fully, eyes open, staring at the ceiling like guarding against something above this world. Eli suddenly remembered the first time he met Shadow, when the dog had just returned from that 48-hour disappearance. Back then, people thought he had been traumatized, but the vet said something Eli never forgot. This dog was not lost. He was taken somewhere, and he remembers every detail, but not in pictures, in scent. And when a dog remembers by smell, he never forgives. Eli sat down beside him and whispered, "If she is still alive, you will take me to her, won't you?" Shadow did not answer, but his eyes left the ceiling and turned to Eli, steady, unblinking. The next day, just before leaving the station, Eli received an envelope, no sender. Inside was a hurried photograph, angled blurry, a little girl in a pink hat standing next to a man with a baseball cap pulled low. Behind them was an unmarked school bus. The paint was peeling, but on the rear window, clear as day, were 4 parallel claw marks. In blue ink written on the back of the photo, "Last seen." If you are still following the trail, go where no one ever thought to look. Emissions Testing Station, South Sector. Do not go alone, and do not let the dog go first. Eli read the last line 3 times. Do not let the dog go first. Why? Because the watcher knew Shadow was the threat, or because where they were headed was no place for something so pure. It began to rain lightly. Eli looked at Shadow, and Shadow looked back. For a moment, Eli had a strange feeling, None of this was happening so he could solve a case. It was happening so Shadow could find something humans had never been able to name. Maybe justice, maybe redemption, or maybe just an answer to a silent cry for help, once scratched into the back of a locked door. And that was why, in the end, he had only one partner left: Shadow. That night, Eli pulled out the USB drive and opened it using a standalone computer with no internet access. A single file appeared. Manifest inside were hundreds of data entries, each line listing a student's name, bus route number, date of disappearance, and one small column marked delivered. But the most terrifying part was not what was in the list, it was the destination column coded with abbreviations. A sequence of cryptic letters. Eli wrote everything down, compared it with city maps, and slowly realized the codes matched abandoned warehouses, pump stations, and bus terminals. Each site had once had a small fire or safety closure. It was a hidden network. Kids were moved unnoticed. When exposed, the route was canceled. Like bus 88X Shadow's starting point. Eli collected data on all discontinued routes over 5 years, cross-checking with students who suddenly transferred. The pattern was chilling. 21 children, all from vulnerable backgrounds, vanished. Emily was one of them. A week later, Eli took leave and started visiting every encoded delivery point. Each was long abandoned, yet signs remained: rope marks, dry food scratches, and that same foul smell from 88X. At an old service station, Shadow suddenly howled as if sensing rot underground. Eli found a hidden space beneath the floorboards. Inside, a student ID, crayon drawings, and a cotton scrap embroidered Emily. He sank to the ground, not from fatigue, but from something breaking inside. He had come full circle, but she was gone. That night, Eli sat in silence, holding the fabric as Shadow lay watch outside the warehouse, not guarding from intruders, but afraid something might slip away. Instead of submitting evidence, Eli went to Walter Green, a retired federal prosecutor, once famed for opening impossible cases. He lived in the woods off-grid. Walter agreed to help, but only with legal precautions. Eli signed an affidavit recorded with a retired inspector. Walter sealed the evidence, assigned a code, and cited risk of internal compromise. The file was encrypted using Emily's birthday. 3 days later, results came back. A forensic analyst confirmed 2 DNA traces, one from a young girl, aged 7 to 9, and one from a convicted child predator. The name struck like ice. It was the night shift security guard at Emily's school. His record was spotless, never reported, never late described by teachers as quiet kind, always had candy for the kids. Eli did not need a search warrant. He just needed Shadow. They returned to the old school, now repainted, renamed, and newly branded as a federally certified safe school. Shadow led the way through hallways, past classrooms, across the gym, until he stopped at a worn wooden door leading to the old equipment room, once the security guard's break room. The lock was rusted. Eli used a crowbar, pried it open with a groan, and the stench of mildew mixed with expired milk poured out like a rotting memory. Inside, a thin mattress on bare concrete, 2 plastic kids' bowls, a carton of milk expired last year, and on the wall-mounted pipe-deep rope marks carved into the rubber coating, Eli stood there, no camera, no backup. Because there was nothing left to say. But the security guard had vanished. When police arrived at his old apartment, all they found were a few cardboard boxes, a broken chair, and a handwritten note on the dining table: "I was only the guide." No name, no address, no blood. Just emptiness, so complete it felt like he had never existed. In one last attempt, Eli returned to a place he had once ignored: the internal records of the Federal Education Department, the office that approved funding for remote bus routes, and greenlit the use of decommissioned military vehicles repurposed for public service. One name appeared again and again on nearly every authorization form: Arnold Keegan. Senior Transportation Supervisor, the same man who had once appeared on television condemning human trafficking, and the only official who signed off on all unmarked bus conversions for non-tracked routes. Eli went to his home, a secluded mountain estate, no cameras. Keegan was not surprised. He opened the door wearing a cardigan, holding a cup of tea, his cloudy eyes holding a glimmer of something between caution and surrender. When he saw Shadow, he froze. That dog was at Site 17B, wasn't it? Eli did not answer. Keegan sat down, hands trembling, tea set aside, and spoke as if reciting a line memorized long ago. I was once assigned to a federal juvenile camp in 2003. There were children who never had real names, transfer orders that never had destinations. I did not kill anyone. I did not strike anyone. But I did not stop it either, because if I had, I would have become one of them. When Eli walked out of that house, he felt no anger, only cold. A cold not from weather, but from a truth that chills the bone. What he heard was not a confession. It was the survival mantra of a system that had learned to swallow conscience and continue on undisturbed. Eli sat alone on the steps, his eyes distant as he watched children leaving school on the street, wondering how many kids have gone missing, and no one ever noticed. Some nights, he woke to the sound of Shadow whimpering. The old dog dreaming paws, twitching like he was running through memory. Eli would place a hand on his head and whisper, "It is all right now. We are still here." In the small room at the back of the old police station, Eli kept a bulletin board covered in photos, faces of children who had no birthdays, no death certificates, only eyes that still asked, "Why did no one come looking for us?" One time a mother from another state called Eli. She said only this, "You do not know me, but I believe the child in that photo is my daughter. Please keep her if you find her soul, so she is never alone again." That Christmas, Eli lit 21 white candles in a circle around Shadow, each one bearing a name. When the cold wind swept through, only one flame went out, the one labeled Noah. Eli lifted his lighter to relight it, then stopped. He let it stay dark. Every time he passed Emily's old school, Eli would stop the car. Even though no one remembered her, no plaque, no memorial. He still brought a small bouquet of flowers, laying them beneath the iron fence, under the sign that read, "Safe Zone for Children." One night, as Shadow lay breathing slow and shallow, Eli opened the wooden box. He took out the list of 21 names and read each one aloud. When he reached the last, Emily Rose W., his voice caught. Shadow let out a faint sound as if agreeing, then closed his eyes. Eli never made a grave for Shadow. Instead, he buried him beneath the tree behind the old warehouse, the place where he had barked for the very first time. On the trunk, Eli carved the words. He heard the call from the place no one dared to look. Eli's case journal was later published by an independent reporter, not through any media outlet. The book was never sold, only printed and sent to police stations in every state where children had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. On the final page, Eli wrote, "Not every dog is a hero, but there are barks that are the final message from a young soul calling out to the world. And if you are silent enough, you will hear it." 1 week after Shadow's funeral, Eli returned to the old bus depot, alone. No yellow tape, no blood, no questions. Just silence as if nothing had ever happened. Each of Eli's footsteps echoed like the voice of a promise never fully kept. He walked down the rusted hallway to the first bus Shadow had clawed. The bus was covered in dust, but sunlight through a broken window lit the floor where the old backpack once lay, like a blade of memory. Eli sat in the backhand, resting on the cold metal seat. "I am sorry," he whispered. To Emily, the 20 others, or maybe to himself for being too late. The next day, Eli started a different journey. He drove through every state where the children had lived, stopping at parks or playgrounds to bury small stones engraved with their names. No ceremonies, no monuments, just memory. In Colorado, he met an elderly woman, foster mother to a missing boy from 2012. She didn't cry. She only looked at the picture and said he had a dog also, a canine, like Shadow. After he disappeared, the dog never left his door. Then one night, it howled and died. I think it heard something I never could. Eli said nothing, just sat quietly. Then he placed a stone with the boy's name in her hands. "One person needs to remember so the rest do not forget," he said, and left with the evening wind. The media buried the story or twisted it into vague headlines like "strange disappearance," no clear conclusion. But among old officers, Eli's notebook was passed hand to hand, quietly without rank among those who still had heart. A young officer from Ohio once wrote, "Eli, I've never met you, but because of you, I didn't give up on a missing case cold for 3 years. My canine growled at an old shipping container. Inside were children's shoes, just like the ones in your notebook." Eli read the letter in a dim room light, barely reaching Shadow's photo. He gave a quiet, weary laugh. "Good," he said. At least one more bark was heard. Once a radio station invited him for an interview. He declined, but sent a recording, Shadow's single bark. Then, silence. Alongside it was a message, "If this sound unsettles you, don't turn off the radio. Ask yourself why some cries are seen as noise instead of calls for help." The following year in Wisconsin, a group of parents built an unofficial memorial. No names of Eli or Shadow, just one line. "Whenever a dog howls in the night, listen." When Eli grew old, he didn't move to a care home. He built a small cabin near Shadow's grave and kept the photo board as it was. Visitors reported hearing soft footsteps, faint breathing, and now and then a bark, distant but clear. When he died, Eli asked not to be buried in a cemetery. No headstone, just a line beneath the tree where Shadow lay. There was once a dog here who never turned away from a cry for help. On his desk, they found an unsigned letter addressed only to the one who will listen. One line read, "If one day you walk past an old bus and a dog growls for no reason, do not pull it away. Open the door. Because maybe a child is still waiting to be found." The next spring, Emily's old school quietly changed its sign, repainted its fence, and placed a small statue in the back playground. No announcement, no ribbon. But those who knew the story recognized it, a dog standing guard at a school bus door. No name. Just a metal plate with the words, "For those who got on," and no one remembered them getting off. For those who once boarded the bus, and no one remembered they never got off. Eli was invited to the opening ceremony. He declined, but he sent a photo Shadow sleeping using the cloth embroidered with Emily as a pillow. On the back of the photo, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were the words, "No applause needed, just someone to remember." On the first anniversary of the case being solved, a quiet prayer service was held in a small mountain church. No priest, no sermon. Just a few empty chairs, a half-burned candle, and a notebook listing the names of missing children. Eli did not attend, but someone saw him sitting across the street in an old car. By the time the service ended, the car was gone. On the stone bench near the church, someone had left behind a dog collar, Shadow's collar, worn, cracked, still bearing scratch marks. A young journalist who had once interviewed Eli shared, "I asked him if he ever regretted diving into a case the system wanted to forget. He just looked at me and said, 'I did not dive in. I just followed the first bark.' The last photo ever taken of Eli was at the old bus stop. He was sitting on the steps beside a boy around 8 years old, his face blurred by sunlight. No one knows who the child was or where he came from. But in the picture, Eli's hand is resting gently on the boy's back, and the way he leans in it looks like he is listening to something only he could hear. 1 year after Eli's death, a parcel was mailed to every police department in the states that had unsolved child disappearances. Inside was a handwritten copy of Shadow's journal. Not a real journal, but an imagined story from the dog's point of view, recounting feelings, the journey, and the sounds no one ever heard. Every entry ended the same way: I cannot speak, but I know when someone needs to be saved. No one knows who wrote it, but one thing is clear: it came from someone who had loved a dog enough to hear its howls in a dream. At the old bus depot, the site of the very first scene, a new fence had been built. On it, someone had hung old student ID cards, as if returning names to the children who had vanished. Each card was blank, except for one written in marker, washed by rain, Emily Rose W. And next to that card, someone had tied a small wool scarf, worn frayed with a bite mark at the edge. It could have been Shadow's. It could have been the last thing Emily ever held. No one knows for sure, but those who visited, even just once, all left with the same feeling that someone was still sitting there behind the fence in the dark, not asking for credit, not looking for reward, only hoping the world would never forget the first bark. Dear friend, this story was never just about a case. It is a reminder that in this seemingly noisy world there are still cries so soft that if you do not stop and listen, you will miss them forever. There are people like Officer Eli. There are loyal souls like Shadow, and there are children like Emily who just want to be remembered, even once. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below. You can simply write "I heard that bark," or share your thoughts about justice, about truth, or simply your belief in a dog that never knew how to lie. And if you believe the world still needs stories like this, subscribe to the channel so you will not miss the journeys to come. Because sometimes a story, a video, a voice could be the very first light that helps someone be found.